The distress beacon was too clean. Camel noticed it the way she noticed everything wrong with the bruised meridian, not through instruments, not through analysis, but through the particular flavor of wrongness that 12 years on working ships had deposited somewhere behind her sternum. A real distress beacon degraded. Signal drop, carrier wobble, the desperate compression of a transmitter running off emergency power. This one was pristine, perfectly calibrated, broadcasting on exactly the right frequency, at exactly the right modulation strength. Someone had built this to be found. Prax, she didn't look up from the nav console. You reading what I'm reading on that beacon? Gunner Prax Oduya's voice came back from the weapons station with the particular flatness of a man who'd already done the math and didn't like it. Clean signal. Too clean. Transit drop in 40 seconds, Pilot Ewan called from up front. You want me to abort? Camel looked at the cargo manifest on her secondary screen. 1,200 tons of processed silicates. Contracted delivery. The kind of contract that had penalty clauses that would hurt for a year if she pulled back now without cause. She thought about the beacon, about how clean it was. Drop us out, she said, but bring the drives to ready. The bruised meridian shuddered out of transit the way she always did, with the particular groan of a ship whose frame had been stressed beyond spec one too many times and had opinions about it. Through the cockpit glass, the Kepler corridor resolved into open space and a debris field that shouldn't have been there. Camel had 1 second to register it. Chunks of something that had been a ship, maybe 2 ships, scattered in a rough ellipse. Not fresh debris, the edges were too cold, the dispersion too wide. Whatever happened here happened weeks ago. The debris had been arranged, not by physics, by something that understood sightlines. Oh, that's not good, Ewan said. 3 contacts resolved on the scope simultaneously. Not emerging from transit, they'd been waiting, running dark, positioned in a perfect triangulation around the debris field center. Around the beacon, each one roughly the size of a UNN frigate, each one with a drive signature Camel had never seen in 12 years of shipping lanes. They were fast. That was the first thing. The way they moved to close distance spoke of drives that didn't care about the kind of fuel economy that kept freighters solvent. General quarters, Camel said. Everyone strap in. She was already at the engineering board, running the math on a transit reentry. Too close. Way too close. She needed 4 minutes to spool up for transit, and the geometry was closing faster than that. She started calculating alternatives instead, which was the kind of problem she was good at and didn't enjoy being good at. The transmission came in 14 seconds after contact. No hail, no standard identification exchange, just data, raw biological telemetry bounced directly into the Meridian's medical monitoring system. It took Camel 3 seconds to understand what she was looking at. The alien vessels had scanned her crew, all 9 of them. Heart rates, muscle mass, skeletal density, reflex latency, metabolic profiles, everything. The kind of scan that required getting through military-grade shielding, which the Meridian did not have, and which these ships had done without effort and without asking. The data was annotated, a secondary language package. The translator chewed on it for a moment, spitting out rough equivalents with confidence ratings attached. Most of the annotations were in the 60% range. One was flagged at 94. Camel read it again, looked at the 3 ships still closing the triangle. What does it say? Prax asked. She pulled it to the main screen. Let the crew see it. The words sat there in the translator's clean typeface, clinical and precise. Manageable. The cargo hold was silent for about 4 seconds. Manageable, said Chief Engineer's mate Solis from somewhere aft, with the particular tone of a woman who had been called worse. They looked at us and wrote manageable. What's their intercept time? Prax asked. 11 minutes to minimum engagement range, Ewan said. If they're running at what I think those drives can do. Camel pulled the biological readouts back up. looked at her crew's data the way the aliens had probably looked at it: heart rates, muscle density, bone mass. She was, on paper, 61 kilograms of endurance-adapted primate with moderate upper body strength and a stress response that currently had her cortisol at twice baseline. Prax was bigger. Solis was smaller. None of them would impress a species that had apparently just finished, using whoever those ships in the debris field had belonged to as some kind of demonstration. She started doing different math. "Someone make coffee," she said. "Real coffee, not the recycled stuff." "Now?" Solis asked. "We've got 11 minutes. She was already pulling up the atmosphere management system, looking at the corridor schematics, thinking about the boarding pod that would be coming, thinking about CO2 distribution curves and pressure door cycling times. Might as well. From the galley, the sound of the coffee maker starting up. The first boarding pod hit the Meridian's hull 7 minutes later, which meant they'd been moving faster than Ewan's estimate. Camel filed that away, the way you filed away everything about a predator, because knowledge was the only currency that mattered now. She was already gone from the bridge. The pod burned through in Cargo Bay 3, which was exactly where Camel had expected it. She'd spent the 7 minutes doing 3 things: rerouting the atmosphere management to flood the corridor between Bay 3 and the engine room with slightly elevated CO2, not enough to register as a threat, just enough to make silicon composite biology work harder, sealing every pressure door in that corridor on manual override, and briefing the crew in 30-second increments while they strapped on the collection of tools and weapons that a working freighter crew accumulated across a decade of stops at stations where the docking fees were cheap and the neighborhoods were not. The Vethka came through the breach in a wedge formation. 4 of them. Camel had reviewed what little xenobiology data existed for the species. Not much, mostly second-hand reports from traders who'd encountered them at range. Silicon composite exoskeletons, roughly bipedal, compound sensory cluster where a face would be on a human. They moved with the synchronization of something that thought collectively, adjusting to each other without signals that the Meridian sensors could detect. They were efficient. Camel watched them on the cargo bay cameras and noted it the way she noted things she needed to understand. They moved to cover the space, they moved to protect each other, they moved to minimize exposure. Every motion was optimal. They hit the elevated CO2 corridor about 90 seconds in, and Camel watched one of them slow, just slightly. A hitch in the synchronized movement, one member of the wedge that wasn't quite keeping up. Small thing, but she'd built the plan around small things. "Prax," she said into the comm. "Bay 3 corridor, 20 seconds. "Moving," Prax said. The thing about Prax was that he was not a particularly large man. He was medium height, medium build, carrying an extra 15 kilos that 12 years of shipboard food had put on him in places that didn't photograph well. The Vethka bioscan had logged him accurately. What it hadn't logged was that Prax had grown up on a rock mining platform in the belt, which meant he'd been fighting in confined spaces since he was 14, and he fought with the particular ruthlessness of someone who'd learned early that the only thing worse than starting a fight was losing one. He hit the lead Vethka at the corridor junction, where 2 pressure doors could close behind them both. Camel sealed the doors the moment he made contact. The sounds were not good. She listened to them on the comm and focused on her board. Atmosphere readings in the sealed corridor, pressure status on the doors. She was also watching the other 3 Vethka, who had stopped moving with their perfect synchronization and were now holding position with something that scanned as uncertainty. They were recalibrating. She'd expected that. What she hadn't fully expected was the sound of Prax hitting the floor. She heard it, the particular impact of a body going down hard, the breath knocked out of him. The Vethka limb strike had caught him across the left side, and the Meridian's medical system updated his vitals in real time. Cracked rib, probable, elevated pain response, compromised mobility in the left leg. The corridor went quiet. She watched the vitals. His heart rate was spiking the way it spiked when he was angry rather than afraid. She'd learned to read the difference over 4 years of working with him. Then she heard him get up. Not fast. She could hear the effort of it, the ragged breath, the sound of a boot finding purchase on the deck plating. Slow and deliberate, and completely without the panic that the Vethka bioscan had presumably logged as the expected response to significant physical damage. He got up. She watched the 3 Vethka outside the sealed doors. Their synchronization faltered. The compound sensory clusters oriented toward the corridor junction, where their wedgemate was now, presumably, facing something that had just absorbed a strike that the scan said should produce incapacitation, and had instead produced annoyance. The Vethka tactical network broadcast something on the open frequency. The translator took longer than usual. She waited. On the screen, reassessing prey classification. Solis, Camel said, steam vent on corridor junction 4, now. The coolant line had been running hot for 6 weeks. Camel had filed 3 maintenance requests about it and been told the parts were on order. She'd stopped being annoyed about it approximately 5 minutes ago when she'd started thinking about it as an asset. The Vethka at corridor junction 4 caught the steam vent directly. It didn't kill them. She hadn't expected it to. But it disrupted the synchronization again, and disrupted synchronization on the cargo bay cameras showed her the thing she'd been watching for. They were calling for more ships. She could see it in the transmission spike on the comms board. A compressed data burst, type beamed in the direction they'd come from. She ran the numbers on likely relay distance and what she could pull from the Kepler corridor traffic data, and came up with 2 more vessels, probably 30 to 40 minutes out. 37 minutes. Prax, she said, status. Left side hurts, he said. The particular flatness in his voice meant he was past the acute pain and into the operational space where he just wanted to finish something. Still working. Can you hold that corridor 5 more minutes? A pause, she could hear his breathing. Yeah, he said. She started building the next problem. 2 more ships on intercept. 18 minutes, now that she'd refined the estimate and they'd adjusted their approach vector for speed over caution. They'd stopped trying to be subtle the moment their boarding team stopped sending clean updates. Camel stood at the engineering console and did the math that no sane captain of a bulk freighter would do. The bruised Meridian massed 14,000 tons loaded, which she currently was. Her maneuvering drives were rated for 0.8 G sustained, designed to ease cargo through docking approaches without stressing the frame. Her main drive was a Epstein variant that the manufacturer had installed in 2341, and which had been serviced by 12 different engineers since, the most recent of which was Camel herself, 6 months ago, when she'd replaced 3 injector rings and told herself the 4th could wait another cycle. The math said she could hit 1.4 G for approximately 9 minutes before something structural gave way. She was going to need 10. Ewan, she said, I need a course to the lead ship. The silence from the cockpit lasted long enough that she could count it. You want to go toward them, Ewan said. The reinforcements are coming from the far side. If we run, they close the distance. If we go toward the lead ship, the geometry changes. She pulled the tactical plot to the shared screen. The 2 incoming vessels have to break formation or risk friendly fire. That opens a gap. The lead ship is a warship, Ewan said. Yes. We are a freighter. I know what we are. Another pause. She heard Ewan pulling up the course calculations, heard the change in her breathing when she got the G-force numbers. The 4th injector ring, Ewan said. Probably, Camel agreed. You said it could wait another cycle. I was wrong. She brought the drive to standby, plot the course. She went to the cargo management system next. 1,200 tons of processed silicates in the hold, dense, angular, moving at whatever velocity the ship was moving at. She started running the numbers on the dump protocols. The hold could vent in under 60 seconds if she overrode the safety interlocks. The silicates would disperse in whatever direction the ship was pointed at the time. If the ship were pointed toward the Vethka formation at 1.4 g, the silicates would be moving at considerable velocity relative to the formation. Not weapons, just cargo, just physics. Course plotted, Ewan said. There was something in her voice that wasn't quite fear, and wasn't quite anything else Camel had a name for. You know, this is insane. The Vethka ran a biological assessment of this crew, Camel said. They measured our muscle mass and our bone density and our cortisol levels, and they decided we were manageable. She brought the main drive online. She could feel the ship shudder with the power coming up, the familiar frequency of the meridian working, the vibration that she'd learned to read like a language. I want to show them what they missed. What did they miss? She thought about what the Vethka scan had captured and what it hadn't. The data in their assessment was accurate. Every number was right. Camel was 61 kilograms of primate with moderate upper body strength and a stress response running hot. All of that was true. What wasn't in the data? Her species had spent 200,000 years on an open savanna learning to run prey to the ground, not with claws or speed or strength, with the one thing that the Vethka assessment didn't have a metric for, with the part that got up. Go, she said. The drive kicked and the meridian lurched forward at 1.4 g, and Camel's vision grayed at the edges as the acceleration hit her, and she grabbed the console with both hands and watched the tactical plot through the gray margins and counted the seconds until the formation broke. It took 4. The lead Vethka ship, a warship, yes, vastly outgunning a bulk freighter, broke to port to avoid the closing distance. Not a tactical maneuver, a collision avoidance reflex, because the freighter was not decelerating. The freighter was accelerating toward them. A 14,000-ton cargo vessel, full hold, main drive at 140% rated output, closing distance on a warship. The tactical network would be screaming at them that this was not a rational decision. The math would be clear. A freighter cannot fight a warship. A freighter should be running. A freighter that is doing this is either malfunctioning or, and here was the thing, here was the gap in the model, is being operated by something that doesn't optimize for survival the way the model expects. Camel dumped the hold at 700 meters. 1,200 tons of processed silicates, dense and angular, dispersed into the flight path of a Vethka warship that had broken formation and had no room to break further. Not weapons, physics. The two incoming ships scattered to avoid the debris cloud. Their triangulation geometry collapsed. The gap opened. Go through it, Camel said. Ewan went through it. The meridian shook like she was going to come apart, and Camel counted the frame stress indicators and watched 3 of them hit yellow and 1 hit red, and she did not stop, because stopping was not the thing she was doing right now. Prax was still in the corridor. Solis was in engineering watching the coolant pressure. Ewan was threading a bulk freighter through a gap in a Vethka formation that hadn't existed 30 seconds ago. They came out the other side. Drive stress indicator 4 went red. The 4th injector ring, she'd known it, she'd chosen it anyway. The meridian was still moving. The Vethka transmission came in while she was pulling up the damage report. Tight beam, direct to the meridian, which meant they'd selected her specifically, which meant the fleet mind had decided to ask rather than simply act, which was itself a thing that the model apparently hadn't accounted for needing to do. The translator took 4 seconds. She watched it work, still gripping the console, 1.4 g easing off as Ewan throttled back now that the gap was behind them, the gray fading from the edges of her vision. The translation resolved. What are you? Camel looked at the damage board. 4th injector ring gone. Frame stress elevated but holding. Cargo hold empty. Crew alive. The Meridian was battered and venting trace atmosphere from a seam that had been marginal for 6 months and had finally let go under the load, but the drive was running and the ship was moving, and Prax's heartbeat on the medical monitor was 68 beats per minute and dropping, which meant he was past the acute phase. She keyed the mic. "We're the species," she said, "that your scan told you was manageable." She let that sit for a second. The Meridian shuddered under her hands. "Run the assessment again," she said. "Different parameters this time. Ask your data what species hunts prey by outlasting it. Ask it what species has never, in 200,000 years of recorded biology, evolved a built-in point where it stops." She watched the scope. The Vethka formation had not resumed. The two incoming ships had slowed their approach. "You measured our muscles," she said. "You should have measured our stubbornness." She cut the transmission. "Solis," she said, "how's the coolant pressure?" "High," Solis said. "Real high. We need to bleed it down." "Do that." She pulled up the nav console, started plotting the course to the nearest station where she could source an injector ring. "Ewan, get me a transit window." "Already on it," Ewan said. From the galley, someone had started the coffee maker again. She could hear it over the ship's ambient noise, the familiar cycling sound, the recycled water pressure building. The Meridian was venting trace atmosphere from a failing seam and running a drive at reduced capacity, and had just dumped 1,200 tons of contracted cargo into a Vethka formation, and someone on this crew had started making coffee. Camel sat down in the captain's chair. First time she'd sat in the past 40 minutes. She thought about the biological assessment sitting in the Vethka fleet mind right now. All those numbers, all that accurate data, and the one thing it still didn't have a metric for. The scope was clear. The Vethka formation was holding distance. "Coffee's ready," Prax said over the comm. His voice was tight with the rib but steady. "Someone want to bring some back here, or am I walking on this leg?" "I'll bring it," Solis said. The Meridian flew on through the debris field, leaking a little, running at 80%, cargo hold empty and crew intact. Behind them, a Vethka fleet mind was, presumably, rebuilding every model it had. Camel drank her coffee. It was not good coffee. It never was on the Meridian. The recycler left a mineral taste that no amount of grounds could fully cover. She drank it anyway, the way she'd drunk bad coffee on bad ships for 12 years, the way her crew drank it without complaining because bad coffee was still coffee, and coffee meant the situation was, on balance, survivable. That was the thing about humans. You could run the assessment 1,000 times. You could measure the muscle and the bone and the cortisol and the reflex latency. You could model everything the biology said about them. And you would still get the prey classification wrong. Every time.